everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and begin our session. Today we're going to spend some time talking about digital mentorship and the way that we spent time really thinking about how we mentor in the digital age. That's really the key. As you think about the way that technology has changed, not just education, but our own lives, there's a lot to consider there. And what it comes down to is we think about the work that we do in schools. One of the biggest things that happens is we tell kids a lot what not to do, and we direct them in a lot of ways. But the whole idea of being self-reliant sometimes gets lost in translation because we're really worried about getting through things and helping kids not make mistakes and keeping them safe and all of those pieces. So that's really what the idea of this session is how do we mentor kids and really adults. It kind of depends on your role, but how do we mentor kids and adults in 2019 in the digital age in meaningful ways, and how do we bring that about?
My name is Shannon Miller. I am the district teacher librarian at Van Meter Community School in Iowa, of course, just about 20 minutes from here. My information is here if you have any questions afterwards, and you'll find me on Twitter and Instagram, and my emails there too.
And my name is Bill Bass. I am from Iowa, but not currently. I grew up in Des Moines. I grew up in Altoona. But now I live in St. Louis, and in my district in St. Louis, I'm an innovation coordinator, which is a completely made-up title. It's one that combined a bunch of different things, and our superintendent decided that we needed to do some things differently, and this was one of the different things. So I'm responsible for innovation, our library program in my district, as well as just kind of that information literacy piece and the kind of content that we bring into our schools. I also currently serve as the president of the board for ISTE, which is actually why I'm here in that capacity. And I spend a lot of time kind of wandering around the country, hearing stories from schools and educators and trying to tell those stories kind of on a national level. So I do lots of stuff. I'm pretty easy to find online. Incidentally, I'm not the forensic psychologist from South Carolina. So he actually has many books. The Boneyard is his thing, and so if you actually look me up, it's not me. There's a different me that you will find a little later. One of the things that we talk about a lot is this idea of shifting in schools and the way that schools shift, and the work that we are doing. I kind of alluded to this already, that we are in a different spot. And it's not that, one of the things that a lot of times I think we do is we lament the past, right? We think about all the things that, like somebody just asked me the other day, don't you think kids are growing up too fast? And ultimately, it doesn't matter whether I think kids are growing up too fast. They're growing up the way that they're growing up. And in 2019, the way that they're growing up is different than the way I grew up. Right, and I remember I went to Southeast Polk, and when I went to Southeast Polk, I remember that first time that I got online, and it wasn't actually at Southeast Polk, but the first time I really used a computer, and I had the 18-inch floppy disk that I put in, and that got erased every other day, just because that's the way it worked. But in that, we are in this time of shift, and things are always going to be changing. And I heard somebody the other day was talking about schools, and there's not a kid, if you're in a K-12 school, there's not a kid in your school who's alive when 9/11 happened. Which is really super weird to actually think about, because that was a defining moment. I mean, I remember being in the classroom and somebody coming and saying, hey, this thing happened. I had a guest speaker and I had to interrupt her so we could turn on the TV. And we watched the entire day kind of unfold with that. And there's not a single kid in the classroom that remembers that was even alive at that point. And so my kids, I have 15-year-old twins. You should totally feel sorry for me, incidentally. But my kids don't have any recollection of a time that that the internet wasn't in my pocket, right? And so that shift that has occurred requires us to approach our work differently. We can't assume that kids are going to get it. And in a lot of cases, in a lot of our schools, and if this isn't your school, that's awesome. But if you think about it, if you think about the teachers that are in your school, there is a teacher that represents this. And if it's you, I'm really sorry. I'm about to be a little bit thoughtfully abrasive to you. It's not okay anymore for us to not mentor kids in their approach to digital literacy and in their approach to using technology. Because the world that they are growing up in, this digital space that they are living in, requires a different set of skills than we grew up with, right? And because of that, we have to be mentors for them. We have to guide them and make them self-reliant, because ultimately, like, I don't want my kids, my 15-year-olds, to live in my basement, right? I want them to move out eventually. I want them to be able to navigate the world, and their world, in a lot of cases, is a digital space. And so, like, that's a shift that has happened, and a lot of times we don't necessarily bring that forth in our work. So, one of the things that I'm going to ask Shannon to talk about is this idea of libraries and the broad reach that they have in our schools.
Really?
I am, yes.
This is good. Well, I think that something that we really have to think about, like before we started, we were just talking about the global mural project that we're doing. And I think as librarians, like, we have such a unique role in the school, because even if you're not a librarian and you're somebody in this room who is an administrator or a teacher, like, remember that your librarian has that reach, because they have the opportunity to do projects with all the kids K-12. They have the chance to connect with people. We have the chance to bring in resources that we need, if it's a Skype or technology or an expert, and we have that reach through social media and through the ways that we do things at our school. So we're really lucky in that sense.
And so in that, we talk about this in terms of, like, librarians, and Shannon and I have talked a lot about this, that there is more influence in libraries than we give credit to, right? There is more influence on our schools. There is more, and what I ask our librarians is, what is the influence that you have on your building? And if you can't answer that question, what influence do you have on your building, then you need to a certain extent, do some soul searching about what your purpose is in that school. Because right now, there are library programs, and I don't know what the situation is in Iowa, honestly, but around the country, as I go and I talk to librarians and schools and all that, I see libraries being cut all over the place. In California, there are more prison libraries than there are school libraries, which is absurd, right? But when you think about it in those circumstances, and you don't have an answer to what influence do I have on my school, or what does it mean to be a librarian in the digital age, that's a problem. Because if you can't define it, that means somebody else is going to define it. And if somebody else defines it, they're going to define it through their lens. And do you really want that to happen? So regardless of what your role is, so I'm not a librarian, I've never been a librarian. I lead our library program, which just means that I do what my librarians tell me to do. And in that case, but I have to advocate for them every day, and I have to tell their story. The only way that I can tell their story is if they tell me their story. And sometimes that's really difficult for my librarians to even tell me their story. So as you think about what it means to be a librarian in the digital age, part of that is telling your story. Because if you don't, somebody else is going to. And chances are it's not going to be the same story that you have. Because ultimately what we want to do is we want to empower kids, and we want to empower teachers through their work and through the library programs. And that's what it means to be a digital mentor, is to bring that empowerment to our schools and bring that empowerment so that they are self-reliant, so that they, metaphorically move out of your house, right? And they can explore new technologies on their own. They can adapt and bring the instructional practices that we know are going to reach kids into the classroom on a regular basis without somebody there. And I don't want to say holding their hand, because that kind of sounds like a put down a little bit, but that's not it, because there are plenty of reasons. That's what mentors do. right? You start out and you're right there the entire time. It's that gradual release of responsibility over time. So, one of the things that I think we have to ask then is, what do we value? And how do we value that in our schools? And not just what do we value personally, but what do we value as a community? So if you think about your school and you think about your community, and think about it in terms of your greater community. It's not just the kids and the adults that are in your school, it's the parents, right? Because everyone who comes into your school is a potential patron. What do you value? What do you as a community value? Because that's how you identify what mentoring needs to be done. So one of the things that kind of makes me crazy is when we take kids' cell phones. Right? Now, again, this is more just straight up my opinion, right? So my 15-year-olds, this was actually in their classroom once. And what this is it looks like a paint can. And it is a cell block. And so every day, kids come in and they put their cell phones in this little paint can. And in doing that, they are, essentially, they're not distracted anymore, but they're also disconnected from everything that is important to them. Right? And so when we think about what we value, what is the message that this is sending to our schools and to our kids in those circumstances? And it's not that I want kids to be distracted, it's just that I want them to be able to choose when they use technology appropriately. And when we don't give them the choice, when we remove the distraction from them, then we're not teaching them, we're not mentoring them as to how to prepare themselves to say, you know what, I'm going to put this down. And truly, adults suck at this too, right? I mean, and it may be you, again, really sorry if it is, but if it's not, like, how do we help each other in this? How do we set up structures? How do we know when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate? The only way we know is when we know our community, know our norms, and are able to reflect and then mentor others around that. Okay, and so, like, taking a kid's cell phone is not going to teach them self-reliance. What that teaches them is that we don't value the same things they value. Because they value, it's not the technology, it's not the cell phone, right? And think about your own use of a cell phone. If you are using a cell phone, it's not the device that you value, it's the connection that you make through that device. Right? It's the content that comes through that device. It's not the thing. Like, legitimately though, I used to value my computer a lot more than I do now. If I leave my computer at home, I'm okay. If I leave my phone at home, I turn around. Right? And it's just what you value. And so what we're telling kids, my kids are the same way. If they leave their phone someplace, they'll go get it. Their Chromebook, it's fine. Because they can manage without that. So what is the connection? And so how do we teach kids about how to be self-reliant in that way? And truly, how do we teach adults? How do we teach each other? And how do we support ourselves as we do that? Because just taking it away is not going to work out. And that's kind of been proven. Now, what it does is it's a temporary fix. But if we look at the long-term gains, like, what do we actually want for our kids? And what that goes back to is, what do we value? So there is some work that I want to share with you. There are three different kinds of this work is from a woman named Alexandra Samuel. And Alexandra put together it was for parents actually, but stick with me because I think it'll make sense for schools. Okay, she says that there are three types of parents. And the first type is limiters. And what she says with limiter parents, is that basically they prefer to raise their kids offline. They want to keep them offline as long as possible. Okay? Now, I bring this up not as a judgment statement, because how you parent or how people in your family or your community parents, like, I don't care, honestly. Like, that's for you to work out. It's not about parenting in this case. But if you think about the classrooms that we have, are there classrooms in your school where you have teachers who are digital limiters? They don't want their kids online. Chances are yes, because there are schools everywhere that is the case. And most of the time it's because they're not comfortable with it or they think it's going to be a distraction. Okay? So, but this is what she says, and remember, this is about parents. She says that limiters' kids are digital exiles, right? They have not grown up with the skills and the tools in order to be successful in a digital world. Okay, so that's her theory on that. They are kept out of the digital world for as long as possible. And so if you look at this, when we think about parents of preschoolers, about half of parents of preschoolers take that approach, but it doesn't last very long, according to her research. The second type, hold on. So let me say this first. When we limit kids' access, just straight up limit kids' access, in some cases that's fine because we want to provide balance for them. But there's always this struggle between balance, between access and like security, or access and health. But going either way can be challenging. We get out of balance really fast, right? And so we want to teach kids how to find their own balance. And so we have the tools of technology. Both Android and iOS both now have wellness tools. And that's great. Like, those are things that maybe you are using right now. I can tell you right now, my kids turned them off. Right? As soon as it came up, they were like, yeah, I don't have time for that. And I let them. Partly because I want them to recognize their own usage. So they analyze their usage, we talk about their usage, but it's because we talk about it, not because there is a tool that keeps them from doing something, or there is a tool that kicks them offline. They are learning how to self-regulate because we have conversations, and because of the relationship that they have with their teachers, the relationship that they have with myself and their mom. The second type, we have limiters. The second type is enablers. And basically, enablers trust their kids online. Now here's the thing, like, I trust my kids online, and I really want to trust my kids online, except I totally don't trust my kids online. Right? Because you can't, like, I know who I was when I was 15. Right? And it's not that I want them to be reliant on me, but I totally spy on my kids. Right? I totally, stalk them online, and I totally try to, I make sure that I'm aware. Now that doesn't mean that as they grow older, that I'm going to be able to do that forever. As far as I know, they have 2 different Instagram accounts. They may have 17. I don't really know, but I do my best to try to have the conversation with them. But what she says about this, again, this is parents. Okay, so they respect their kids' ability to make their own choices online and take their cues from how other families use technology. Okay, so they're relying on other families' use of technology in order to inform their own use. They're not relying on their teachers, they're not relying on their parents, they're relying on other families because at home, they are making their own choices. Okay, so if we take that into a classroom, what does that mean for a classroom when we have teachers who are enablers who may not pay attention, right? You probably know these teachers too. They may not pay attention. Kids may be maybe off task and all that. Kids are going to get off task. They get off task even if they don't have technology, right? But when we talk about it in terms of enablers, what she says is that those kids are digital orphans. That's super strong language. Digital orphans is, that's a big thing to say. But at the same time, if you think about what we would consider an orphan, they're exploring the world without anybody to guide them. And so if you take that and transfer that into a classroom, how do we help guide kids if we don't let them make mistakes, if we don't give them opportunities online? If as teachers, we're not describing the choices we make in our work, right? And so that can be as simple as with elementary kids, you're doing a Google search. Why are you making the choices that you're making? Like, just talking through that internal dialogue that you do naturally helps to mentor kids, because otherwise they become those digital orphans. Okay? What this says is once kids reach high school, nearly half of their parents take the enabler approach. And if you are in a high school, you know that this is true. Right? And truly, like, we think that kids we're gonna get it, and hey, you know what? They're smarter about this technology thing than we are. Which may be true. right? But that doesn't mean they don't need mentors. That doesn't mean that it should be a free-for-all. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a healthy skepticism, or even, kind of have them a little bit scared about, what happens if my teacher sees this or my parents see this. Like, that's okay. But somebody has to guide them in this, and that's where the last session is it's about the conversation, right? It's about the connection that you can make with kids, because there is no amount of technology that is going to bridge the relationship gap between you and a kid in your class, or as a librarian, you and your school, because you know kids differently than classroom teachers do. They know kids differently than you. And it's because they're not with them, you're not with them every day and all that, but ultimately, what we're looking for is mentors. And so somebody has to step up and be that mentor. And that in a lot of cases, that is classroom teachers. In a lot of cases, librarian. In a lot of cases, it's not just one or the other, it's a partnership between. Right? And so how do we mentor kids? What she says about mentors is that mentors kids are the digital heirs. And I really like that language, right? Because a digital heir basically means that they are inheriting the practices that we value as a community. Going back to that question, what do you value? If you don't know what you value as a community, then how do you know how to mentor them? Right? And so if they're going to inherit the things, the know-how, the approach, the ideas that come with being in a digital space, if they're going to be able to inherit those, somebody has to be their mentor. And a lot of times, again, it's going to be this partnership. So how are you going to create those partnerships? How are you going to find opportunities to mentor? Because ultimately, depending on your role, if you're a classroom teacher, you have direct access to kids. If you're a librarian, you may not have direct access to kids in the same way. So who are you going to mentor? Where are you going to have to mentor the teachers? Or you're going to have to mentor your administrators? You're going to have to mentor those people. In some cases, mentor parents. Because again, parents suck at this. And it's not because they want to suck at this, it's because they don't know what it means to be a mentor for kids in their space. They can parent, they can do all the things, but parenting in the digital age is really, really messy. And it's really hard. But that doesn't mean that we can't help them. And it's not our responsibility to help them, it's our community's responsibility to help them. And you have to know what you value as a community if you're going to do that work. Okay, so alexandersamuel.com, she has a whole series on this. It's really good stuff. So I would recommend that you take a look at that. But these are those three things: limiters, enablers, and mentors. And so where does that fall in your school? So I want to give you just a second to have a brief, legitimately brief conversation, 45-second conversation with somebody around you. Be nice to each other, it's okay. Just what does it, what do you think about this? These three levels, we have limiters, enablers, and mentors. Does that resonate? Does that make sense? Just have a really brief conversation, and I will bring you back here in just a second. Cool? Go.
No, I don't. Right, like I know
I guess it's something called
I feel bad sleeping, but I have to like use night shifts. And I see some teachers go through
All right, can you say something?
and
All right, so I'm going to ask you to come back.
we'll come to this. Thank you.
So as you think about these three different levels, right? Limiters, enablers, and mentors. I'm just going to ask like two people to share. Does it resonate? Does it make sense? Yes. Why? Go ahead.
I've seen all of those. I
Yeah.
guess. I'm an instructional coach in middle school.
Yes.
We recently stopped letting kids take their phones to lunch because it was causing issues.
Yeah.
And now we've seen other issues,
Sure.
obviously. But more probably relevant to this is we have new filters that have like locked down everything.
Yeah.
And I've been really pushing against that because I think that they should be able to like choose whether to be on a random website or not.
Yeah.
But I think it's hard for the teachers to, not everybody has the same awareness, I guess,
Totally.
or ability to teach about it.
Yeah. Well, so I think that, the bottom line is you still have to run a school, right? You still need kids to learn things, and you still have to be sure, like, there's still behavior things that you have to take care of and all of that. And sometimes, just like at home, like, if my kids do something wrong, like that, maybe I'm going to take their phone away, right? Or turn off the internet completely in my house. Like, those are things that I can do, but it's not a permanent fix. And it should be the beginning of a conversation as opposed to the end. Thank you. Anyone else? Perfect. Well, we happen to have a student here who probably has an opinion.
So I'm Josie Derflinger. I'm a junior here at Van Meter High School, which is about 20 minutes away from here. And I come from a kind of a different situation from everyone. My dad is the superintendent of Van Meter. So I kind of have that, if I do this wrong, like my dad's going to know. And so we kind of had a conversation while you guys were talking about the way my teachers are with my phones and kind of how my parents react to certain things. And at Van Meter, we're a small school, so I don't have a huge variety of teachers, but there's definitely like a variety of the limiters, the enablers, and the mentors. For the most part, they're pretty good at making sure like you can have your phone out, there's something, take care of it, but use it for an educational purpose, like we're able to quick Google something on our phone if we're doing something on paper. But it also is very frustrating when I get into certain classes and I'm like, crap, I have to put my phone away. There's one class in particular which is Spanish, and it's a foreign language, so sometimes there's things that I just don't understand. So if we're doing group work, I have to make sure I'm getting out my computer and asking for permission because I don't have access to my phone, which is kind of frustrating. But for the most part, the teachers are really good about letting us use our phones and understanding that, yeah, we're going to get on them, but we also have to know the appropriate times. I don't feel like there's ever been a time where one of my teachers is like, I'm taking your phone, like this is a punishment. They'll be like, hey, put it away, not the best time to use it. Can we use it after? Can we use it in between activities? Which I think is a variety of examples of everything.
Very nice. Perfect. So there's lots of ways that we talk about mentorship and ways that we support mentorship, and Shannon has been deeply involved in Future Ready, and so.
Yeah, and I think that, who in here is a librarian? So, awesome, that's great. And how many of you work with librarians? Everybody in here? For the most part, yeah, Paulina's and so Future Ready Librarians is just a piece of Future Ready Schools. But the great thing I think about this is that when we look at this, if it's from working with family members and communities and building those partnerships, there couldn't be anything, I think, better than just talking about that, how to support mentoring, than the framework that we have. And so we're lucky as librarians now because we have this framework to support those conversations and the work that we do too.
And as an administrator, one of the things that I think is nice about the Future Ready framework specifically for librarians is it gives common language, right? It is, so these are things that I care about. as an administrator. These are things that I ultimately have some responsibility for. And so if we have common language, then my librarians can go to their principals. They can go to our superintendent. They can have conversations using the common language that Future Ready gives us in order to provide that mentorship. Because you're not just mentoring, you're not just mentoring kids and you're not just mentoring teachers, but you have to mentor the community as a whole. And that's where this lives. And that's one of the pieces that I know in my district we rely on this structure, this framework, in order to really make inroads into our classrooms and into our through our librarians into our schools and to our greater community. So if you're unfamiliar with the Future Ready framework, I would highly recommend you go and spend some time with it because there's lots of really strong resources there as well. So a few things, we talked about strategies just a little bit, but one of the things, there are a few strategies I want to share real quick. So first of all is just finding partners, finding those people who are going to help you. You are not responsible, regardless of your role, you're not responsible for mentorship, you're not responsible for the digital well-being of your entire community. Like no single person is responsible for that. It's just like for a long time, we thought, okay, so if we're going to do digital citizenship, we'll just take, the librarian can do it. And then it's the difference between the conversations that happen in the classroom and happen in the library are stark, right? And so it's not part of the ongoing conversation. It is a conversation that happens for 1 or 2 lessons or, a series of lessons that happen in the library, and then it never transfers back to the classroom. And so that disconnect, just that we have seen with digital citizenship, continues. But the same thing happens when you're talking about mentorship and you're talking about how you're going to reach kids. If you don't have partners in this, you're not going to reach everybody. You can't reach everybody. You have too many kids in your schools. You're responsible for too many things as librarians. But in partnership with an instructional coach or an administrator or even a PTO, a parent group, or a local community like a business, there are so many opportunities for partners, and people want to partner with schools. Businesses want to partner with schools for a variety of reasons. First of all, it looks really good, right? I mean, that's part of it. But also, a lot of businesses and a lot of organizations are trying to give back to our communities. And so if you can, again, go back and define what do you value as your community, that makes it a whole lot easier to find partners. And you have to be able to verbalize that. So one of those strategies in finding partners is being able to verbalize what you value in your school, what you value in your community, and what you need. Like, you have to have an ask, right? So what do you need from whoever you're trying to partner with? And so that can be, sometimes that's resources, sometimes it's expertise, sometimes it's just an outside voice. And sometimes they can reach parents maybe differently than you can. Sometimes they can reach other teachers. It really just depends. You have to know your community in order to find those partners. You also have to recognize that there's many paths in order to get there. There's not one right way to do it. The way that Shannon does it in her school is dramatically different than the way that my librarians do it in my schools. The way that you are going to find those paths is because you know your community, because you know what you value, and because you know that the mentorship piece of this is the thing that you're going to focus on. It's the thing that you want out of this, right? Because if you're just talking about digital stuff in general, a lot of times we talk about tools. A lot of times we talk about research and approaches, and all of those are really good things. But that doesn't mean that you're actually mentoring somebody. You're just giving information. And there's a big difference between providing information, and we know this because of classrooms, right? There's a difference between providing information and kids learning information. It works the same way for adults. It works the same way for people in general. You have to know, you have to have that transfer, and it has to be meaningful for them. So figure out your path. So find your partners, figure out your path, and figure out that path together. Because that's what's going to essentially resonate over time with folks. And then understand that you're not in this alone. And there are plenty of people out in the world who are working on this same stuff. Okay? So we call this virtual outreach. It is reaching out to the world beyond your specific community. Okay, there are so many people. It's easy to find community now. At one point, so as I think about this from an ISTE lens, right? When I first joined ISTE 20-ish years ago, the reason that I joined ISTE, the reason that I'm a recovering high school English teacher, and so when I was in the high school classroom, I joined the National Council of Teachers of English, right? I joined those organizations because I wanted a community, because I needed people who were going to be able to think with me. We don't need organizations anymore, right? ISTE, you should not, if you are a member of ISTE, awesome. If you're not a member of ISTE, that's fine too. You have to find your community though. You can find your community without an organization to do it. So who is your community? Who is in your community, and how do you find your community? Facebook, the Future Ready Facebook group, has an amazing amount of people who are there and help each other on a daily basis. There are plenty of ways to find people out in the world in order to do this virtual outreach, in order to find those partners, in order to find the paths and the strategies that might work in your school, or to adapt those things that other people have used in their schools, in their classrooms, in order to make a difference in mentoring kids and adults around digital spaces. Because the digital is not going away. I mean, I think that's well established. Even though there are still plenty of people out in the world who have said, this is just a fad, this whole internet thing. Super weird, I don't understand it. But it's still out there. Eventually we're going to get past this. Well, I don't know that we're going to. The information is too rich, right? But that information now comes with responsibility, and it is the responsibility of our schools, of our librarians, of our coaches, of our administrators, in order to mentor our kids to know what the things are that are going to resonate with them and their community, and that are going to make a difference in their lives, in order to approach the digital world in a way that's meaningful and right and good, and so they are self-reliant, so they metaphorically move out of your basement. Nope. So, one of the things that we're going to, another strategy that, and I've kind of alluded to this, is that we have to model online interactions. Actually, I'm going to go back to this because I really like it. We often talk about this idea of creation and consumption, and how there's this tug of war between them, right? We want kids to create more. We want kids to create more. Here's the thing. Yes, we do, except that in order for them to create, they have to consume something, right? Everything that they create is influenced by something that they consume. And so to say that we don't want them to consume things, that they consume too much stuff, that's fine, okay, that's cool. Except that, what are they going to create then? Creation requires influence. Influence comes from consumption. So how are you going to mentor kids in order to create something if we are limiting their consumption? And that goes back to that whole, our filters and how we block things. We have to provide opportunities for kids to consume. And consume in meaningful ways. And we have to mentor them around the things that are going to be meaningful for them. Because otherwise, we focus a lot on creation. And, it sounds like I'm down on creation. I'm totally not. I'm a big proponent of creation. Except that it's not one or the other. It's both and. You have to consume in order to create. We don't ask kids to write without reading. Right? It's the same thing. You have to give them models. A YouTube video is a mentor text for kids. A pictogram, any kind of digital product is a mentor text for kids, because eventually they're going to create something that is based on something that they have consumed. So, as you go and you talk about mentorship and you talk about how kids are going to be creating and using digital tools, it's super important that we also give them those mentor texts. We wouldn't do it with reading. We wouldn't do it with writing. We can't do it with digital stuff. It doesn't work. So now, those online interactions, the way that we talk about the stuff that we do online, as simple as why are you posting, with our own kids maybe, why am I posting this picture? Who am I hoping to reach through this? What am I communicating with this? And just having the conversation. Simple as, why are you choosing the words that you're choosing when you do a Google search? Why are you choosing the database that you're using when you are looking for information? A lot of times we make assumptions that kids are just going to follow along with us. Really, they're thinking about something completely different until we talk to them again, right? That's what mentoring is. It's making those intentional decisions. And then the last one is really just protecting student privacy. How we, the ways that we look at privacy are changing. And they're changing every day. But the bottom line is, in schools, we are under an obligation to protect student privacy. And what that means is that when we go to, and maybe you've heard it here, I don't know, I go to a lot of conferences and I hear it all over the place. Somebody saying, oh yeah, you can use this tool, it's cool. And then if you look at the terms of service, it's 13 and over. Like, it makes zero sense. And there are very well-known speakers who are talking about digital tools who will absolutely, completely neglect the whole idea of student privacy. Always be aware. And that's one of the things that we have to mentor kids and adults around: who is using this information? What is the product here? How are these things happening? And it's not easy. Like, I totally get that it's not easy. It's a big old drag to have to go through and slog through a terms of service. But the bottom line is, it's also our responsibility. And that's part of being a citizen of the digital age. So, to leave this goes back to the partners, but the idea of that we're smarter together, and that kind of blending our wisdom and our experiences, that's what kids need, right? And that's what adults need. We have more experience. We may not have more experience with technology specifically, we have more experience with life. And mentoring isn't technology dependent. Mentoring is a part of an overall process. And when we think about, when we displace technology in the digital world from our physical world, that's when things get confusing for kids, because they don't see those as separate things. And truly, in a lot of cases, like, we don't really see those as separate things until we walk into a school building, until we open a classroom door, and then we have to separate these things because our curriculum dictates it, because our culture of our school dictates it, because our leadership dictates it. And so we separate these things, which is completely unrealistic, because as soon as they walk out the door, that's when it actually matters. Right? When kids are sitting in front of us, we can threaten them, we can cajole them, we can bribe them, we can do all the things that teachers do, and then they walk out the door and they make the decisions that they make. And that's when it matters. It doesn't matter when they're sitting in front of us, because they're going to comply. The decisions that they make, the self-reliance that they have, and the ability to make their own decisions, that's where it really matters. And that's where mentorship kicks in. And what's part of the problem with mentorship is that we don't actually know if it's going to work. Right? I mean, you really don't know if the things that you're doing right now are having the impact, because it's not going to manifest itself until 10 years from now. But that's not the reason not to try it. And that's not the reason to not bring those things into our schools and into our classrooms and give kids opportunities to be mentored in meaningful ways. So, one of the biggest things that you can do is extend your library. And there's lots of ways to extend your library. One of those is the new cultural norms, is how do we share our story. I talked about sharing our story before. You can only mentor if you're telling your story. You can only mentor if you are valued by your community. And the only way you're going to be valued by your community truly is to tell your story, because if it's not your story, it's somebody else's story. And so, I mean, there's lots of ways to tell your story now. It's a whole new world when you have these opportunities. And that doesn't mean you have to be on social media. And let me say this: if you are using social media and nobody in your community cares about Twitter, then it's actually your fault, right? That they're not listening, because you're not using the medium that is going to communicate to them. This is about knowing your community. This is about knowing how to reach your people and what the culture is. What you value. If your community doesn't value Twitter, if your community doesn't value newsletters or email or whatever it is, that medium doesn't work. You have to find a different medium. Because part of it is, yes, it's the receiver of the message, but part of it is the messenger. And so if you are not providing the message in a way that people are going to respond to it, then it's partly your fault. Again, really sorry to be thoughtfully abrasive. And this is the last question that I want you to kind of think about. What does it mean to be literate in the digital age? How does that look? How does literacy change now? Because literate in the digital age doesn't mean that you can read and write. Literate means a dramatically different thing. And so what does that look like, and how are you going to approach that? So we're running out of time. I want to go back to this really quick, this whole idea of learners, enablers, and mentors, because we can move back and forth between all these things, right? We can move from being a limiter to being an enabler to being a mentor and then back to being a limiter, and that's okay, right? It is circumstantial, and it is, you have to make the decision at the time. But ultimately, if you think about what this looks like what is your primary mode going to be? And I think that's the question to ask yourself. What is your primary mode? Are you going to be a mentor? Are you going to be an enabler? Are you going to be a limiter most of the time? And we would like to say to be a mentor. Because, the best way a mentor can prepare another leader is to bring great people in and to connect with different people that are going to push your thinking in both good and bad ways. Right? And I say good and bad ways, but positive and negative ways, right? The things that they should challenge you, but they should also reinforce you. That's what mentors do. And so you should not just have one mentor, and you should not be the sole mentor for any one person, or any kid, or any group, right? You need multiple mentors in order to make a difference in the world. So as our time wraps up, just be a mentor. Be someone who is going to help push that work forward and find those partners along the way.
Yeah, Bill and I wrote a little book this year called Leading from the Library with ISTE. There is a link that will take you there, and our next presentation actually goes over those 5 points that we have within the book too. And we have a copy here also if you wanted to look at it, but it was pretty fun working with Bill, and his perspective on libraries and librarians is awesome and has really pushed us forward, I think, on what we're doing. So a lot of that too, not just for us as librarians, but to share also with the leaders within our school too.
And part of this really is around mentorship, is how we can see ourselves as mentors along the way. So with that, we just want to thank you. We will stick around here for a little while if you would like to chat or anything like that. But thanks for spending time with us. And hopefully this was helpful for you. And if we can help in the future, just holler in our general direction. So thanks so much, guys.